"Who is Tricia?" I asked, my voice steady despite the thundering in my chest as I placed the birthday card on our kitchen table. Joshua looked up from his laptop, confusion crossing his face before something shifted in his eyes. Recognition, followed swiftly by alarm. "And who are Emma and Noah?" I continued, laying down 2 school photographs beside the card. "Because according to this card, they're very grateful for everything their amazing daddy does for them." Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Joshua closed his laptop with deliberate slowness. "Selena, I can explain this." "I certainly hope so," I replied, fighting to maintain my composure as 15 years of marriage suddenly felt like quicksand beneath my feet. "Because finding out my husband has children I've never heard of isn't how I plan to spend our anniversary weekend." The silence between us stretched, heavy, with 15 years of shared history and the sudden, terrible weight of deception. Outside our Victorian home in Portland, rain tapped against the windows, a soundtrack to the unraveling of my life as I'd known it. "They're not—" "It's complicated," Joshua finally said, rubbing his temple with a practiced gesture I'd always found endearing. Now it struck me as calculated, buying time while he formulated a response. "How did you even find these?" "That's what concerns you right now? How I discovered your secret? Not the fact that you've been living a double life?" I felt something shift inside me, the initial shock hardening into a cold, clarifying anger. "Joshua," sighed, seeming to deflate before my eyes. "It's not what you think, Selena." "Then what exactly is it? Because from where I'm standing, these look very much like pictures of children who call you daddy. Children whose mother writes you intimate birthday cards." I maintained eye contact, refusing to be the one who looked away. "Children who, unless I've had some sort of psychotic break, I did not give birth to during our 15-year marriage." Joshua stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "I need some air. We can discuss this when we're both calmer." "We'll discuss this now," I said, my tone leaving no room for negotiation. "Unless you want me to call Tricia directly?" Her number was conveniently included on the back of the card. The color drained from Joshua's face. He glanced toward the door, calculating escape routes perhaps, before reluctantly sitting back down. "How long have you known?" he asked quietly. "About your secret family?" "Approximately 3 hours and 22 minutes. I pulled out the chair across from him and sat down, placing my hands flat on the table to hide their trembling. "But I suspect I've been married to a stranger for much longer than that. My name is Selena Harrison, 43 years old, and until today, I believed I knew my life. I'm a forensic accountant specializing in fraud investigation for a national consulting firm. My colleagues jokingly call me the Bloodhound for my ability to sniff out financial discrepancies and hidden assets. Ironic, considering I'd failed to detect the massive deception in my own home. Joshua and I met during my final year of graduate school. He was a charming architectural engineer, giving a guest lecture on structural integrity, both his professional specialty and what I mistakenly thought formed the foundation of our relationship. We married after a whirlwind 18-month courtship, settling in Portland where our careers flourished. We'd made the decision not to have children early in our marriage, focusing instead on our professional goals and frequent travel. Or rather, Joshua had gently but persistently steered our conversations away from family planning until I eventually accepted our child-free status as a mutual choice. Another lie in a marriage apparently built on them. 15 years of shared meals, holiday, celebrations, and vacation photographs. 15 years of what I thought was honest partnership, rendered suspect by a misdelivered envelope. The mail carrier had mixed up our address with a similar one across town. I'd opened the large manila envelope without checking the label, assuming it contained the anniversary trip documents Joshua had mentioned were arriving. Instead, I found birthday cards, school photographs, and medical records, all making it abundantly clear that my husband maintained a separate life with another woman and 2 children, Emma, age 12, and Noah, age 10. Children whose birth dates fell squarely within our marriage. Children whose mother, Tricia Williams, wrote to My Dearest Jay with the comfortable intimacy of a long-term relationship. Children who had Joshua's distinctive hazel eyes and cleft chin. They're my family, Joshua finally said, breaking the eye. Silence and meeting my gaze with an unexpected directness. But it's not the typical situation you're imagining. Enlighten me then, I replied, sliding the envelope between us. What's atypical about hiding a long-term relationship and 2 children from your wife for over a decade? Tricia and I were together before you and I met, he began, his voice taking on a rehearsed quality that made me wonder how many times he'd practiced this explanation. When we broke up, I didn't know she was pregnant with Emma. So you discovered your ex-girlfriend had your child and decided what? That your wife didn't need to know about it? The bitterness in my voice surprised even me. And Noah? Was he also a surprise from this previous relationship that conveniently continued during our marriage? Joshua's expression hardened. I found out about Emma when she was 3. I wanted to tell you, but the timing was never right. Your father had just died. Then you were up for partner, then spare me the litany of excuses for your decade of deception, I interrupted. What about Noah? After I reconnected with Emma, Tricia and I, he trailed off, having the grace to look uncomfortable. It was complicated. We share a history, and seeing my daughter. So you've been having an affair for our entire marriage, I stated flatly. One that produced another child. One that involves birthdays and school events and medical appointments. I gestured to the papers spread between us. One that looks remarkably like a second marriage, Joshua. It's not like that, he protested weakly. Then what exactly is it like? Because from these photographs, it looks like you've been playing happy family with them on all those business trips and professional conferences that conveniently increased in frequency over the past decade. The silence that followed contained his admission. I thought the discovery of the envelope had been painful, but watching my husband unable to deny his double life twisted the knife even deeper. In the tense silence of our kitchen, I studied the man I'd called my husband for 15 years. The familiar lines of his face now seemed like a mask concealing a stranger. I took a deep breath, gathering the emotional control that had served me well throughout my career. My full name is Selena Marie Harrison, born and raised in Seattle before relocating to Portland for my career. At 43, I've built a reputation as one of the most meticulous forensic accountants on the West Coast. My specialty is uncovering hidden assets in high-profile divorce cases and corporate fraud investigations. I follow the money to find the truth, a skill set that was about to become unexpectedly personal. My colleagues respect me for my attention to detail and emotional detachment. Selena can find a decimal point error in a 1,000-page financial statement and never raise her voice when confronting a lying CEO, my boss once said at a company gathering. My ability to remain calm while dismantling someone's financial deceptions has made me particularly effective in courtroom testimony. But now, sitting across from Joshua, I realized how differently we approach devastating discoveries. While I instinctively analyze and strategize, Joshua was visibly floundering, his composed exterior crumbling as he confronted the collapse of his carefully maintained double life. I hadn't always been this methodical. My father, a financial advisor who lost clients' life savings through careless oversight, taught me the bitter lesson of trust without verification. I was 17 when his negligence was discovered, watching our family splinter under public disgrace and private recriminations. Always check the numbers yourself, Selena, my mother had advised during their acrimonious divorce. Don't build your life on someone else's promises. That formative experience shaped me professionally and, personally, I became the person who always reads the fine print, who maintains separate accounts and emergency funds, who verifies rather than assumes. These habits had occasionally frustrated Joshua. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Don't you trust me? He'd ask when I questioned vacation, expenses, or investment decisions, but he'd come to respect what he called my professional paranoia. The irony was staggering. All my professional vigilance, and I'd missed the most fundamental deception in my own life. How did you manage it? I asked, breaking the silence. Logistically, I mean. 15 years is a long time to maintain two separate households. Joshua seemed surprised by the question, perhaps expecting tears or accusations rather than analytical inquiry. But this was how I processed shock, by understanding the mechanics before confronting the emotions. It wasn't two households, not exactly, he explained hesitantly. Tricia and the kids have their own place. I visit when I can and provide financial support. How much financial support? The accountant in me automatically calculated our joint expenses, our tax returns, our investment portfolios, searching for the diverted funds I'd somehow missed. Does it matter? Joshua asked, frustration edging into his voice. It matters to me, I replied evenly. I'd like to know what percentage of our marital assets has been supporting your second family. He flinched at the term. It's not like that. Selena, I've kept everything separate. I use my personal accounts, not our joint funds. I raised an eyebrow. The personal accounts that receive direct deposits from your salary? A salary enhanced by the job opportunity I connected you with through my college roommate? The personal accounts that benefit from tax advantages of our married filing status? Those separate accounts? Joshua's jaw tightened. I didn't plan for any of this to happen. And yet you managed it quite effectively for over a decade, I observed. Multiple business trips every month, weekend conferences, late nights at the year office, all while maintaining a separate relationship that produced 2 children. I stood and walked to the kitchen window, needing physical distance as the full implications settled into my understanding. Outside, our carefully landscaped garden, a joint project we'd spent countless weekends perfecting, seemed mockingly picturesque. What I can't figure out, I continued, keeping my back to him, is why you maintained our marriage at all. If you have this whole other life, these children you clearly care for, why continue the charade with me? The silence stretched so long I finally turned to face him. Joshua was staring at his hands, shoulders slumped in defeat. Because I love you, he said quietly. A laugh escaped me, sharp and humorless. That's not love, Joshua. That's ownership. You wanted everything, the respected professional wife, the traditional family, the freedom to move between worlds while keeping everyone exactly where you placed them. It wasn't like that, he insisted, looking up with a flash of anger. You and I built something valuable together. Our life has meaning and purpose. Our life, I repeated slowly, was a carefully constructed fiction, one where I played my assigned role without access to the full script. I returned to the table and began methodically gathering the scattered evidence of his deception, sorting papers with the same precision I applied to case files at work. My mind was already racing ahead, analyzing options and calculating next steps while my heart remained carefully numb, a defense mechanism I'd perfected over years of professional detachment. What are you going to do? Joshua asked, watching my organized movements with growing apprehension. I looked up from the neatly stacked papers, studying the face I'd woken up beside for 15 years. That depends on your next moves. I need complete information before making any decisions. Full disclosure of your financial arrangements with Tricia and the children. Detailed explanations of how you've managed this deception. And an honest account of what you actually want moving forward. And if I provide all that, then I'll determine whether there's anything left worth salvaging. I slid the organized evidence into the envelope with finality. But first, I'm going to verify everything you tell me. every financial statement, every timeline, every explanation. I trust you understand why. Joshua nodded slowly, resignation settling across his features. He recognized this version of me, the methodical investigator who would leave no document unexamined, no statement unverified. It was the professional persona he'd always admired from a distance, never imagining it would one day be focused on dismantling his own carefully constructed deceptions. "I'll need some time," I added, tucking the envelope under my arm. "I'm going to stay at Maxine's tonight. I'll contact you tomorrow about how we proceed." As I gathered my keys and phone, Joshua remained at the table, suddenly looking older and smaller than the confident man I'd married. The architect of two separate lives now trapped in the crumbling structure of his own design. As I drove to Maxine's condo through Portland's rain-slicked streets, memories of my relationship with Joshua flickered through my mind like an old film. Real. Scenes from a marriage I now questioned completely. We'd met at Reed College during his guest lecture on architectural engineering. I was completing my master's thesis on financial forensics and had attended the lecture purely out of curiosity. Joshua spoke with such passion about creating structures that appeared beautiful, yet contained hidden elements of support, systems invisible to observers, but crucial to integrity. The irony of that metaphor wasn't lost on me now. After the lecture, I'd asked a question about cost analysis that caught his attention. "Most people ask about the visible elements, the dramatic cantilevers or glass expanses," he'd said. "You're the first to ask about the unseen financial structures." His smile had been genuine, his interest immediate and flattering. Our courtship unfolded with the comfortable inevitability of two compatible people recognizing themselves in each other. Joshua appreciated my analytical mind and unwavering focus. I admired his creativity and the way he translated abstract concepts into tangible designs. We balanced each other, or so I believed, his artistic vision complemented by my practical oversight. The weekend trips to the Oregon coast where we'd walk for hours discussing our future. The comfortable Sunday mornings reading separate sections of the newspaper, occasionally sharing interesting snippets. The professional respect we showed for each other's careers, attending important events and celebrating achievements. All these moments had seemed to confirm that we'd built something genuine and lasting. Our wedding had been small but elegant. 50 guests at a historic Portland hotel with a view of the Willamette River. My mother had traveled from her retirement community in Arizona, temporarily setting aside her bitterness toward marriage as an institution to support my choice. "Joshua seems different from your father," she'd conceded during the reception. "More grounded." Another judgment that time had proven catastrophically wrong. We'd settled into marriage with relative ease. We maintained separate bank accounts, as well as joint ones. A setup Joshua initially questioned but eventually embraced as a practical approach to managing two professional incomes. We developed routines and traditions, anniversary dinners at Athena's Greek restaurant, Christmas mornings with cinnamon rolls and coffee, summer hiking trips in the Cascades. The decision not to have children had evolved over several conversations early in our marriage. Joshua had raised concerns about our demanding careers and frequent travel. "Do we really want to compromise our lifestyle?" he'd asked. "We have so much freedom this way." When I'd expressed uncertainty, wondering if we might regret the choice, later he'd been gently persistent. "We have such a fulfilling life together," he'd said. "Why complicate it?" Gradually, I'd accepted his perspective. We became the go-to childless couple among our friends, available for last-minute dinner invitations, generous with gifts for others' children, ready with our home for friends needing child-free getaways. I'd occasionally felt a fleeting sadness when holding a friend's newborn or watching children play at family gatherings, but I'd convinced myself our child-free status was a mutual choice reflecting shared values. Now, every conversation about children twisted into something sinister in my memory. Had Joshua steered me away from motherhood because he already had children with another woman? Had my compliance with remaining childless made me the perfect unwitting partner in his deception? The thought made me grip the steering wheel tighter as I navigated toward Maxine's neighborhood. Over the years, Joshua's business trips had indeed increased in frequency. "The Seattle project needs more oversight," he'd explain. Or, "The Vancouver clients are asking for on-site consultations." I'd never questioned these absences, partly because my own work often required travel, and partly because I trusted him, implicitly. When he called from hotel rooms to wish me good night, I'd imagined him alone in anonymous corporate accommodations, not beside another woman in a home where his children slept down the hall. There had been signs, I now realized. Small inconsistencies I'd dismissed or rationalized. The occasional weekend when cell reception was mysteriously poor. The gifts he purchased during trips that sometimes seemed oddly chosen. A woman's scarf he claimed was for his assistants. Birthday. Children's books he said were for colleagues' kids. Once I'd found a child's drawing in his briefcase, a stick figure family labeled Daddy, Mommy, Emma, Noah. He'd explained it away as something the office receptionist's child had given him. I'd believed him without question. As I pulled into Maxine's visitor parking space, I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. I looked remarkably composed for someone whose life had just imploded. Only the tightness around my eyes betrayed the tumult beneath my carefully maintained exterior. Maxine Reynolds had been my closest friend since we met at a professional conference 8 years ago. As the head of cybersecurity for a major financial institution, she shared my analytical approach to life's problems and my low tolerance for deception. Her divorce 3 years earlier had been swift and merciless after her husband's infidelity. "No second chances for liars," was her motto, one I'd privately thought somewhat inflexible until today. I hadn't called ahead, but Maxine's surprised expression at finding me on her doorstep quickly shifted to concern. "Selena, what's wrong?" she asked, ushering me inside her minimalist condo. "I need a place to stay tonight," I said, my composure finally beginning to crack. "And possibly your expertise in digital investigation." Maxine's eyebrows rose, but she simply nodded and led me to her kitchen, pouring 2 glasses of the expensive scotch she reserved for significant occasions. "Start from the beginning," she said, sliding a glass toward me. I placed the manila envelope on her counter. "I found out today that Joshua has another family, a woman named Tricia, 2 children, Emma and Noah." To her credit, Maxine didn't gasp or offer platitudes. She took a measured sip of her scotch, eyes narrowing in the way they did when she was processing complex information. "How long?" "The children are 12 and 10, I replied. "So at least the entire duration of our marriage." "And you had no idea?" I shook my head, allowing myself a small, bitter smile. The forensic accountant who testifies against hiding assets in high-profile divorces couldn't spot the deception in her own marriage. The irony isn't lost on me. Maxine reached for the envelope. "May I?" I nodded, watching as she methodically examined the contents, her expression darkening as she flipped through school photos, medical records, and the birthday card signed with obvious intimacy. "What do you need from me?" she asked finally, looking up with the focused determination I'd always appreciated about her. "First, a place to think away from Joshua," I said. "And tomorrow, help conducting a thorough investigation before I decide my next steps." Maxine nodded, already reaching for her laptop. "We'll start with a comprehensive digital audit. Emails, location history, financial transactions. Then move to property records, tax filings, any legal documents that might connect him to this woman or the children." Her immediate shift to action mode was exactly what I needed. A reminder that while I couldn't control Joshua's deception, I could control my response to it. As we began planning our investigation strategy, I felt a familiar clarity returning. The shock was still present, but now channeled into the methodical approach that had served me throughout my professional life. "You know," Maxine said as she typed search parameters into her specialized software, Most people in your situation would be falling apart right now. I might still, I admitted. But first, I need information, complete information. While Maxine's sophisticated software began its digital excavation of Joshua's online life, we sat at her dining table mapping out a timeline of our marriage on her whiteboard. I needed to identify when the deception began and what signs I might have overlooked. When did Joshua's travel schedule intensify? Maxine asked, marker poised over the board. I thought back, mentally scrolling through years of casual goodbyes and airport pickups. About 12 years ago, right after we'd purchased our house. He said the firm was expanding to Seattle and Vancouver, requiring more on-site project management. Maxine made a notation on the timeline. Approximately when Emma would have been born or shortly after. The observation hit me with unexpected force. I'd been calculating mortgage options and renovation budgets while my husband had been welcoming his firstborn child with another woman. Two life-altering events occurring in parallel universes, connected only by Joshua's movement between them. There was a period about 11 years ago when he seemed distant, I continued, memories surfacing with new significance. I attributed it to work stress. He was distracted, checked his phone constantly, took calls in another room. Classic. Signs of deception, Maxine noted dispassionately. I suggested couples therapy, I recalled, the memory suddenly vivid. He was surprisingly resistant for someone who'd always valued communication. He insisted it was just a demanding project phase that would pass. And it had passed, or seemed to. Joshua had returned to his attentive self after a few months, and I'd dismissed my concerns as baseless. Now I wondered if that period marked when he'd discovered Emma's existence and was deciding how to manage his double life. What about financial irregularities? Maxine asked, her cybersecurity mindset naturally gravitating toward concrete data points. That's what's most surprising, I admitted. There weren't any obvious ones. We've always maintained separate personal accounts alongside our joint accounts. Joshua's architectural firm pays him through direct deposit, and he transfers an agreed percentage to our joint account for household expenses. I'd never questioned the arrangement. It mirrored my own financial organization and respected our independence within the partnership. The separate accounts had seemed like a strength of our marriage, not a mechanism enabling deception. His personal discretionary spending wasn't unusual for someone at his income level, I continued. Designer clothes, high-end electronics, occasional luxury watches, all visible purchases he didn't attempt to hide. Maxine frowned. Supporting? A separate household and 2 children would require significant funds. Either he's been hiding major income streams or he's been living beyond his means, I finished. A new realization dawning. Joshua has always carried more credit card debt than I was comfortable with. He called it managing cash flow, and assured me it was temporary. But temporary has stretched for years. I pulled out my phone and accessed our shared cloud storage, finding the tax returns I'd meticulously filed each year. While we maintained separate day-to-day finances, we filed taxes jointly. Another arena where I might find previously overlooked clues. Look at his charitable contributions, I said, zooming in on a section from 3 years ago. They've increased substantially over time. I always thought it reflected his growing social conscience, but now, a convenient way to explain large sums leaving his accounts, Maxine observed, especially if the actual recipients aren't registered charities, requiring documentation. The revelations continued as we dissected the past decade. Joshua's insistence on maintaining a post office box for work documents too sensitive for our home mailbox. His periodic guys' weekends with college friends I'd never met. His resistance to joining our finances more fully despite my occasional suggestions that it might simplify our retirement planning. What about his phone? Maxine asked. Any unusual security measures? He changed his phone password about 5 years ago, I recalled. Said it was required by his firm's new security protocol. I never questioned it. My own firm has similar requirements. And social media? Minimal presence, I replied. He claimed it was to protect client privacy, but he's always been private about personal matters online. Now I wonder if it was to prevent his worlds from colliding. Maxine's laptop chimed with initial search results. Her expression grew serious as she reviewed the findings. Selena, there's a property record in Vancouver, Washington. Purchased 9 years ago by a Tricia Williams, but the mortgage is co-signed by Joshua Harrison. My stomach tightened as another piece fell into place. Vancouver, just across the Columbia. River from Portland, close enough for frequent visits but separate enough to maintain distance. The location explained so many site visits and client meetings over the years. There's more, Maxine continued, scrolling through records. School registration documents for both children list Joshua as their father, with emergency contact information that includes his cell number and work address. Despite having seen the photographs and birthday card, these official records hit differently. Concrete proof of Joshua's integration into these children's lives on paper, not just in photographs and handwritten notes. What about social media for Tricia or the children? I asked, bracing myself for what might be revealed. Maxine typed rapidly, then turned the screen toward me. Tricia Williams has a private Instagram account, but her profile picture shows her with 2 children who match the photos you found. I stared at the image of a smiling woman with auburn hair, her arms around 2 children on what appeared to be a beach. The resemblance between the children and Joshua was unmistakable. Emma had his eyes, Noah his distinctive cleft chin. Can you access the account? I asked, knowing Maxine's technical capabilities extended into legally gray areas. She hesitated. I could, but you need to be certain that's what you want. Some things can't be unseen. I considered the boundary she was asking me to respect. Did I really need to see evidence of family vacations, birthday celebrations, and daily life moments that paralleled, or perhaps even mirrored, the ones Joshua shared with me? Not yet, I decided. Let's focus on financial and legal documentation. First, I need to understand the structural aspects before dealing with the emotional ones. Maxine nodded approval at my methodical approach. There's one more thing you should see. She pulled up a LinkedIn profile for Joshua that I'd never viewed, having connected with him only on personal accounts. His professional profile lists him as having worked on several residential projects in Vancouver during the exact timeframes of his increased travel. He was hiding in plain sight, I murmured, creating legitimate business reasons to be where his other family lived. It's actually quite sophisticated, Maxine acknowledged with the professional respect of one strategist for another. He created a deception that aligned with his actual professional activities, making it virtually impossible to distinguish legitimate business from personal visits. As the evening progressed, more inconsistencies emerged, small on their own, but damning in aggregate. Joshua's annual professional development retreat that coincided with summer break for local schools. His resistance to our family's gathering for holidays, always citing logistics rather than preference. His casual dismissal of my occasional suggestions that we might relocate for my career advancement. Looking back, I could see how Joshua had constructed a life with me that perfectly accommodated his other family while keeping me isolated from anyone who might recognize the discrepancy. The architectural precision of his deception was both impressive and devastating. You need rest, Maxine finally said, noting my exhaustion. Tomorrow we'll continue with a more targeted investigation, now that we have baseline information. As I prepared for bed in her spare room, I found myself in the unfamiliar position of being impressed by the very actions that had destroyed my trust. Joshua had executed a complex, long-term deception with remarkable skill, the same strategic thinking and attention to detail I'd always admired in his professional work, now revealed as the architecture of betrayal. I awoke before dawn in Maxine's spare bedroom, momentarily disoriented before the previous day's revelations came rushing back. For a brief moment between sleep and full consciousness, my life had still been intact. Now, clarity brought with it the hollow certainty that nothing would ever be the same. My phone showed 3 missed calls and 7 text messages from Joshua, ranging from apologetic to increasingly concerned. 17 p.m. Selena, we need to talk about this. Please call me. 9:32 p.m. I understand you need space. Just let me know you're safe. 11:05 p.m. I know this is a shock. I've made terrible mistakes, but there's more you need to understand. 12:38 a.m. Are you at Maxine's? I'm worried about you. 1:17 a.m. I never meant to hurt you. Please give me a chance to explain everything. 3:40 a.m. I can't sleep. I know you deserve better than this. I'm so sorry. 6:05 a.m. I'll be at home all day waiting to talk when you're ready. Please come home. I set the phone aside without responding. Joshua's concern seemed genuine, but I'd spent 15 years believing his sincerity. I needed facts before facing him again. Maxine was already at her dining table, laptop open and coffee brewing. She'd never been one to waste time on pleasantries when there was work to be done. I found something significant, she said without preamble, sliding a folder toward me. These are property records and mortgage statements for a lake house purchased 7 years ago in Joseph, Oregon. I flipped through the documents, confusion growing. This is in both their names, Joshua Harrison and Tricia Williams as joint owners. And it was purchased with a substantial down payment right after Joshua received his partnership buy-in bonus from his firm, Maxine added. The bonus you mentioned he invested in various long-term holdings. The property included 5 acres with lake frontage and a custom-designed cabin, exactly the type of retreat Joshua and I had occasionally discussed buying someday when our careers settled down. He'd apparently made that dream come true, just not with me. There's more, Maxine continued. I accessed Joshua's cloud backup through the shared family plan you mentioned. Most files are work-related, but there's a folder labeled Family Documents that contains, well, you should see for yourself. She turned her laptop toward me. The folder contained hundreds of files meticulously organized into subfolders: Emma's school, Noah's activities, medical records, family photos, vacation plans. Years of documented family life, carefully maintained by the man who had told me family wasn't his priority. I clicked on family photos with a strange detachment, as if viewing evidence in a case rather than glimpses of my husband's secret life. The images showed a progression over years: Joshua holding a newborn Emma, toddler Noah on Joshua's shoulders at what appeared to be a zoo. The 4 of them, Joshua, Tricia, Emma, and Noah, posed in matching outfits for professional holiday. Portraits: Joshua teaching Emma to ride a bicycle, Noah blowing out birthday candles with Joshua beaming beside him. There are videos, too, Maxine said quietly. I selected one labeled Emma's Dance Recital from 3 years ago. The camera focused on a young girl in a ballet costume performing on stage, then panned to show Joshua sitting beside Tricia, his arm around her shoulders as they watched their daughter perform. His expression contained a pride I'd never seen before, open, unguarded, and deeply paternal. He has a whole separate digital life, I murmured. Organized with the same precision, he applies to his architectural projects, and protected with surprisingly sophisticated security measures, Maxine confirmed. These files are encrypted and compartmentalized in ways most people wouldn't know how to implement. He's gone to significant lengths to keep these worlds separate. Something about the calculated nature of the security measures sparked a realization. Check for life insurance policies, I said suddenly, and any estate planning documents. Maxine's fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling up financial records from various sources. There's a substantial life insurance policy, she confirmed after several minutes. Taken out 8 years ago with Tricia Williams as primary beneficiary, and the children as secondary beneficiaries. The implications were staggering. Joshua hadn't just been maintaining a second family. He'd been financially providing for them in the event of his death, potentially at the expense of the wife listed on his legal marriage certificate. "Does he have a separate policy that names you?" Maxine asked. "Yes, but it's much smaller. Our financial advisor recommended basic coverage for both of us early in our marriage." Another memory resurfaced. Joshua insisted on handling the paperwork himself and maintained separate advisors for his personal investments. I never questioned it because we each had professional contacts from before our marriage. "What about your will and estate plans?" "Standard reciprocal arrangements. Everything to the surviving spouse, then to designated charities since we don't have children." The phrase, "since we don't have children," now carried a bitter irony. "At least, that's what I thought we'd established. I need to verify the actual documents." I pulled out my phone and opened my secure digital vault, accessing the copies of our estate planning documents. What I found sent a chill through me. "Our reciprocal wills were amended 3 years ago during a routine update with our attorney," I said slowly. Joshua's updated version includes a trust provision I didn't notice at the time. A significant portion of his estate would go to a trust managed by his brother Henry for the benefit of family members in need of educational support. "A cleverly disguised provision for his children," Maxine observed. "Vague enough to avoid raising questions, but specific enough to be legally enforceable." "And I signed off on it," I said, the realization burning. The attorney presented the changes as standard updates to tax provisions. I reviewed the documents but missed the significance of that clause. "You couldn't have known what to look for," Maxine reminded me. "You were operating on the assumption of a shared reality that didn't exist." As morning progressed, our investigation revealed more evidence of Joshua's double life. Credit card statements showing purchases of children's clothing and toys during business trips. Calendar entries coded as VM project reviews that aligned perfectly with school events listed in the family documents folder. Email exchanges with Tricia discussing parenting decisions and household arrangements, saved in a hidden account accessible only through his encrypted files. The most devastating discovery came just before noon. In a subfolder labeled Future Plans, we found architectural drawings for a larger house in Vancouver, designed by Joshua himself, with a projected construction start date 3 months away. The plans included detailed room layouts labeled Master Suite, Emma's Room, Noah's Room, and Nursery. "Nursery?" I echoed, staring at the screen. Maxine clicked through more documents until she found medical records from 2 months earlier. A prenatal visit summary for Tricia Williams, currently 14 weeks pregnant. The room tilted slightly as this final piece fell into place. While I had been planning our 15th anniversary trip, Joshua had been designing a new home for his expanding family. The calculated betrayal transcended mere deception. It revealed a deliberate, ongoing commitment to this parallel life that he intended to continue indefinitely. "I need to see them," I said suddenly, closing the laptop. "See?" "Who?" Maxine asked, though her expression suggested she already knew. "Tricia and the children. Not to confront them," I clarified as alarm crossed Maxine's face. "Just to see them with my own eyes. To make this real." Maxine hesitated. "Are you sure? That's wise? You're still processing everything we've discovered." "I need to see what Joshua was choosing," I explained, unable to articulate fully why this felt necessary. "Not just in documents and photos, but in reality. I need to understand what was important enough to him to risk everything we built together." After a moment's consideration, Maxine nodded. "I found their address in Vancouver. It's about a 30-minute drive. But Selena," she added cautiously, "what exactly do you hope to gain from this?" I considered her question as I gathered my coat and purse. "Clarity," I finally answered. "I need to see the life he chose to build in parallel to ours, before I decide what to do about the life we shared." As morning light filtered through Maxine's guest room blinds, I awoke with the clarity that often follows emotional upheaval. The shock remained, but now accompanied by a steely resolve. I needed a comprehensive strategy, not just emotional reactions. I found Maxine already awake, reviewing data compiled overnight by her specialized software programs. Beside her laptop sat a legal pad covered with methodical notes. "I've been thinking," she said without preamble. "You need professional reinforcements beyond just me." I nodded, already reaching for my phone. "I'm calling Karen Blackwood." Karen had been my attorney during several high-profile fraud cases where my forensic accounting expertise had been crucial to her litigation strategy. More importantly, she specialized in complex divorce cases involving hidden assets and deceptive financial arrangements. If anyone could help me navigate the legal labyrinth ahead, it was Karen. "Karen, it's Selena Harrison," I said when she answered. "I need your counsel on an urgent personal matter." "Yes, it involves divorce and potential financial fraud." Karen's response was immediate and decisive. "I can see you at 9. Bring any documentation you've gathered so far." After arranging the meeting, I turned to Maxine. "We need a secure way to document everything we find. Joshua is undoubtedly destroying evidence as we speak." "Already handled," Maxine replied, gesturing toward her sophisticated data backup systems. "I've created encrypted archives of everything we've discovered. I've also initiated deeper background searches through my financial intelligence contacts." The methodical approach felt comforting, transforming personal betrayal into a case to be solved, evidence to be gathered, a strategy to be implemented. This was familiar territory, even if the personal stakes were unprecedented. "We should secure your personal finances immediately," Maxine suggested. "Change all passwords, freeze credit accounts, separate any commingled assets." I was already typing a list on my tablet. "I'll need to notify my bank and investment managers. Most of our accounts are separate, but there are joint holdings that need protection." For the next hour, we worked with focused efficiency, me securing financial accounts while Maxine continued digital forensics. By the time we left for my appointment with Karen, I had changed 27 passwords, initiated security freezes with all 3 credit bureaus, and contacted my primary financial institutions to flag potential unauthorized access attempts. Karen's office occupied the 23rd floor of Portland's most prestigious downtown building, a space designed to intimidate opponents and reassure clients of her substantial professional standing. She greeted me with the brisk efficiency I'd always appreciated, assessing my composed demeanor with approval. "Tell me everything," she instructed once we were settled in her conference room. "Start with the timeline and focus on documentable facts." For 45 minutes, I outlined the situation, presenting the evidence Maxine and I had compiled. Karen took meticulous notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions but otherwise listening with professional detachment. "This is one of the most comprehensive double lives I've encountered," she acknowledged when I finished. "Most spouses who maintain secondary relationships aren't this organized or thorough." "Joshua approaches everything with architectural precision," I replied. "Including, apparently, deception." Karen nodded thoughtfully. "That methodical nature works to our advantage. People who create elaborate systems leave equally elaborate evidence trails." She spread several documents on the table between us. "Here's what we need to do immediately. First, file for legal separation rather than divorce. This creates financial protections without alerting Joshua to your full strategy. Second, secure a forensic financial investigation of all his accounts, including business holdings. Third, document the timeline of deception meticulously. Courts take long-term fraud very seriously." "What about Tricia and the children?" I asked, the practical realities of the situation extending beyond my marriage. "Legally, they're relevant primarily for establishing the extent and duration of Joshua's deception," Karen explained. "However, I strongly advise against direct contact with Them until we've secured your position. Emotions run high in these situations, and anything you say could be mischaracterized later. I considered her advice, weighing legal strategy against my need for complete information. I understand the risks, but I need to see the full picture before proceeding. That includes understanding exactly what Joshua has told Tricia about our marriage. Karen's expression remained neutral, but I detected a flicker of concern. If you choose to pursue that course, do so with extreme caution. Document everything, bring a witness if possible, and maintain professional composure. I always do, I reminded her. After finishing with Karen, I met Athena Rodriguez for lunch at a quiet restaurant far from my usual haunts. As my financial advisor for the past decade, Athena had helped structure my investment portfolio and retirement planning. More importantly, she was one of the few people who understood both my financial situation and my relationship with Joshua. We need to create a financial firewall immediately, Athena advised after I explained the situation. Joshua has likely been planning contingencies for years. What do you recommend? I asked, trusting her expertise implicitly. First, we transfer your individual holdings to new accounts at different institutions. Second, we document the paper trail of all marital assets, establishing clear provenance. Third, we create a separate liquid emergency fund that can sustain you through protracted legal proceedings if necessary. For the next hour, we restructured my financial architecture, creating protective barriers against potential manipulation. Athena's efficiency matched my own methodical approach, transforming shock and betrayal into actionable financial strategy. There's something else you should consider, Athena said as we concluded. The psychological impact of financial betrayal often manifests later, after the practical matters are handled. You'll need support beyond just legal and financial counsel. Her concern touched me unexpectedly. Throughout the day of strategic planning, I'd maintained professional detachment, approaching my collapsing marriage as I would a complex fraud case. But beneath the composed exterior, emotional tremors were beginning to surface. I'll consider that, I promised, though psychological support seemed secondary to securing my position. By late afternoon, I had assembled a comprehensive response. Team: Karen for legal strategy, Athena for financial protection, Maxine for digital investigation, and David Winters, a private investigator Karen recommended for additional evidence gathering. We need to monitor Joshua's movements and communications, David explained during our brief meeting. If he's maintained this double life for 15 years, he undoubtedly has contingency plans for discovery. The systematic approach provided a framework for navigating chaos. Each expert contributed to a protective strategy, securing my position while documenting Joshua's deception. Within 8 hours of discovering his betrayal, I had initiated countermeasures that would have taken most people weeks to implement. As evening approached, Joshua's text messages grew increasingly urgent. 17 p.m. Selena, please come home. We need to talk face to face. 5:30 p.m. I know you're upset, but disappearing isn't helping anything. 6:45 p.m. At least let me know you're safe. This silence isn't like you. I finally responded with calculated brevity. I'm safe. I need time and space to process what I've discovered. Do not attempt to access any of my personal accounts or files. His immediate reply revealed genuine alarm. What are you doing, Selena? Whatever you're planning, we should discuss this together first. The assumption that I would still prioritize together after discovering 15 years of deception reinforced my resolve. Joshua had always admired my professional competence while underestimating my personal strength. That miscalculation would prove costly as I mobilized the full extent of my capabilities against the architecture of his deception. The modest 2-story house with blue trim sat on a quiet street in Vancouver, just across the Columbia River from Portland. Nothing about its exterior suggested it contained the secret that had shattered my marriage. Just an ordinary family home with a children's bicycle leaning against the front porch and wind chimes hanging from the eaves. "That's her car," Maxine said, pointing to a silver Volvo SUV in the driveway. "According to vehicle registration records, it's owned by Tricia Williams." I checked my watch. 10:37 a.m. on a Tuesday. If the children followed standard school schedules, they would be in class. Now. My timing was deliberate. I wanted to speak with Tricia alone, without Emma and Noah present. "I'll wait here," Maxine offered, putting the car in park across the street. "Take your time, but call me immediately if you need support." With a deep breath, I stepped out of the car and approached the house that should have felt completely foreign, yet contained disturbing elements of familiarity. The porch planters held the same variety of ferns Joshua had insisted on for our home. The door knocker was an architectural detail I recognized from a salvage shop we'd visited during a weekend trip to Seattle. Before I could knock, the front door opened, revealing a woman I recognized from the photographs. Auburn hair pulled into a casual ponytail, wearing jeans and a simple blouse. She looked unsurprised to see me. "You must be Selena," she said with remarkable composure. "Joshua called to warn me you might come." The casual familiarity with which she spoke my name, as if I were an acquaintance she'd heard stories about, momentarily left me speechless. Of course Joshua had warned her. He was still trying to manage both worlds, even as they collided. "Yes," I finally managed. "And you're Tricia," she nodded, studying me with undisguised curiosity. "Would you like to come in? I think we have a lot to discuss." The surreal civility of the moment struck me as I followed her into the house. The entryway opened to a living room that could have been designed by Joshua himself. The same architectural sensibilities evident in the built-in bookshelves and window placements that characterized our Portland home. "Coffee?" Tricia offered, gesturing toward the kitchen. "No, thank you," I declined, not wanting to participate in this bizarre pantomime of normalcy. "I just need some answers." "Did you know Joshua was married?" I asked directly, needing to establish this fundamental fact before proceeding. "Yes," she replied without hesitation. "From the beginning." The simple confirmation stung despite its predictability. "And you were comfortable with that arrangement? Having children with a married man?" Tricia's expression shifted slightly. "It's complicated, Selena. Joshua and I have a history that predates your relationship with him. When Emma came along, we had to make difficult decisions. Decisions that apparently included deceiving me for 15 years, I observed, struggling to maintain my professional detachment. "Were you aware that Joshua told me we decided not to have children together? That he actively discouraged me from becoming a mother while secretly parenting your children?" A flicker of genuine surprise crossed her face. "He told me you weren't interested in having children, that you were career-focused and had explicitly chosen not to become a mother." Another lie exposed. Joshua had created separate narratives for each of us, tailored to justify his choices while preventing either woman from questioning the arrangement. Our conversation was interrupted when the front door opened suddenly. Joshua stood in the doorway, his face pale with shock at finding us together. "Selena," he said, eyes darting between Tricia and me. "What are you doing here?" "Getting answers you weren't willing to provide," I replied calmly. Joshua's composure cracked as he realized the carefully separated worlds he'd maintained were now irreversibly colliding. "We need to talk privately," he insisted. "This isn't how this should happen." "I disagree," I replied, standing my ground. "After 15 years of deception, transparency is exactly what's needed now." Before Joshua could respond, another movement at the door caught my attention. A woman I didn't recognize stood there, holding a young girl's hand. The child, about 6 years old, looked at Joshua with clear recognition. "Josh?" the woman said uncertainly, looking between all of us with growing confusion. I thought we were meeting you at the park. Joshua's face drained of all color. Karen, he whispered, the name barely audible. In that moment, I realized what I was witnessing. Not just the collision of two worlds, but three. The architectural precision of Joshua's compartmentalized life was collapsing spectacularly, each separate structure crashing into the others in a cascade of revelation. I left Vancouver in a daze, barely registering the drive back to Maxine's condo. The confrontation had revealed far more than I'd anticipated, not just the details of Joshua's relationship with Tricia and their children, but the existence of yet another family he'd been maintaining. He has 4 children, I told Maxine as I entered her living room, my voice strangely detached even to my own ears. 4. Emma and Noah with Tricia, Lily with someone named Karen Mitchell, and a son named James from before we met. Maxine's expression shifted from concern to shock. 4 children? While actively discouraging you from having any? Apparently, motherhood was something Joshua wanted to experience with everyone except his wife, I replied, the bitterness finally seeping through my professional composure. I sank onto Maxine's sofa, the full weight of Joshua's betrayal crashing, down with physical force. For days, I'd maintained careful control, approaching the situation as I would a professional case, methodically gathering evidence, documenting inconsistencies, building a comprehensive understanding of the deception. But witnessing the collision of Joshua's separate worlds had pierced through my analytical detachment. Karen Mitchell arrived with their daughter Lily while I was talking to Tricia, I explained, still processing the surreal scene. She had no idea about me either. Joshua told her I was a client he was designing a house for. How has he maintained this for so long? Maxine wondered, pouring me a glass of whiskey without asking. Architectural precision, I replied, accepting the drink gratefully. He designed each relationship as a separate structure, with carefully managed boundaries, schedules, and narratives. Each woman was told a different story about his availability and circumstances. And the children? How did he explain his limited presence in their lives? To Tricia's children, he was a loving father with a demanding career that required travel. To Karen's daughter, he was a devoted dad who lived elsewhere because of complex work arrangements. I took a long sip of whiskey, feeling its warmth spread through my numb body. He created plausible explanations tailored to each audience. The most devastating aspect wasn't just the infidelity or the secret families. It was the calculated decision to deny me the opportunity to become a mother while actively parenting 4 children with other women. The clinical cruelty of this choice transcended mere deception. I need to document everything, I said suddenly, my forensic instincts resurfacing through the emotional haze. Every conversation, every contradiction, every financial connection. Maxine nodded, already reaching for her laptop. We'll create a comprehensive record. Dates, locations, financial transfers, property connections. Everything that establishes the pattern and duration of deception. Over the next several hours, we constructed a detailed timeline of Joshua's double, no, quadruple, life. Financial records revealed regular payments to accounts in Vancouver and Boise. Calendar entries showed patterns of absence that corresponded with school events and family milestones. Property records confirmed his connections to homes in both locations, though he had carefully kept his name off most official documents. There's something else we need to consider, Maxine said as we reviewed the mounting evidence. The possibility that there are more families we haven't discovered yet. The suggestion hit me with unexpected force. If Joshua had successfully maintained relationships with 3 different women and 4 children for over a decade, what was to say there weren't others? My phone chimed with a text from Joshua. We need to talk. This isn't what you think. Please, meet me tomorrow to discuss this rationally. The familiar pattern of his communication, suggesting I was being irrational while positioning himself as the reasonable party, now appeared transparent rather than persuasive. The architect of deception was losing structural control as his carefully compartmentalized life collapsed around him. "I need a team," I said decisively, ignoring Joshua's message. "Legal, financial, and investigative specialists who can help. Document every aspect of this deception." The decision crystallized with sudden clarity. I would approach my failing marriage with the same methodical thoroughness I applied to complex fraud cases. No emotional shortcuts, no wishful thinking, just systematic investigation and strategic response. "I'll call Karen Blackwood in the morning," I decided, referring to the divorce attorney who had retained my forensic accounting services for several high-profile cases. Her experience with complex financial deceptions within marriages makes her the obvious choice. Maxine nodded approval. "I'll contact Athena Rodriguez for financial analysis, and David Winters for private investigation support." The professional network I'd built throughout my career now became the foundation for dismantling my husband's elaborate deception. Instead of drowning in betrayal, I would document it with forensic precision. As I finally lay down to sleep in Maxine's guest room, I realized the profound shift that had occurred. The turning point wasn't just discovering Joshua's betrayal, it was recognizing my own capacity to respond with strategic clarity rather than emotional devastation. The husband who had systematically deceived me for 15 years had unwittingly created the perfect opponent, a forensic specialist with intimate knowledge of his financial structures and personal patterns, now focused exclusively on documenting his deception. 5 days after discovering Joshua's secret family, I sat in Karen's conference room with my assembled team of experts. The wall displayed a comprehensive timeline of Joshua's deception, financial flowcharts tracking his resource allocation between households, and property documentation for assets connected to both relationships. "Joshua has retained Michael Donovan," Karen informed us, referencing a well-known divorce attorney with a reputation for aggressive tactics. "He's filed a counter-motion to your separation request, claiming your actions constitute financial harassment." I nodded, having anticipated this response. Joshua's architectural approach extends to legal strategy as well. Create a strong offensive to mask defensive vulnerabilities. "Exactly," Karen agreed. "Which is why our approach needs to be both comprehensive and precise. No emotional arguments, just irrefutable documentation of sustained deception." David, the private investigator, presented his initial findings. Joshua established a clear pattern over the years. 3 nights weekly at his Vancouver family home, typically Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. He maintains a detailed calendar system with color-coded entries that align with his architectural project. Schedule, creating plausible work explanations for his absences. "The financial structure is equally systematic," Athena added, pointing to her analysis on the screen. "He's maintained separate accounts for each household, with controlled transfers that wouldn't trigger standard fraud detection systems. However, he's been increasingly leveraging joint marital assets to secure loans for his Vancouver family expenses." Maxine's digital forensics had yielded perhaps the most damning evidence. Joshua created an elaborate digital compartmentalization system. Separate email accounts, carefully segregated cloud storage, even different social media profiles with privacy settings that would prevent cross-discovery. Most concerning, I found evidence he's been monitoring Selena's accounts for years. He had alerts set to notify him if she accessed certain financial platforms or location services. The revelation that Joshua had been surveilling me while I trusted him completely sent a chill through the room. The man I'd shared my life with hadn't just been living a double life. He'd been actively monitoring me to ensure his deception remained intact. "This level of premeditation strengthens our position significantly," Karen noted. "Courts typically distinguish between momentary lapses and sustained, calculated deception. Joshua's behavior clearly demonstrates the latter. Now we need to Implement our counter-strategy, I said, focusing the group's attention. Not just for legal protection, but to ensure I'm positioned for whatever comes next. Over the next 3 hours, we developed a multi-layered approach that would simultaneously protect my interests while documenting Joshua's actions. First, a comprehensive financial firewall. Athena had already restructured my personal accounts and investments, but now we identified every potential vulnerability in joint holdings and created protection mechanisms. We documented the provenance of all marital assets, establishing clear timelines of contribution and growth. Second, a strategic legal framework. Karen prepared documentation of Joshua's deception for court filing, but with a calculated delay that would allow additional evidence gathering. We'll position this as a breach of fiduciary duty within the marriage, she explained. The financial implications of his deception extend beyond emotional betrayal into legally actionable territory. Third, a digital security protocol. Maxine implemented advanced protection measures for all my accounts and devices. He's likely to escalate his surveillance attempts once he realizes you're taking systematic action, she warned. We need to create a secure communications channel that he can't access or monitor. Fourth, a personal security assessment. David expressed concerns about Joshua's potential reaction once he realized the full extent of my response. Men who maintain long-term deceptions often react unpredictably when their control dissolves, he cautioned. I recommend temporary relocation to an address he doesn't know, along with basic security protocols. While I appreciated their thoroughness, I pushed back on this suggestion. I understand the precaution, but I won't be driven from my home. Instead, I'll upgrade the security system and document every interaction with Joshua. The final component of our strategy involved the Vancouver family. Despite my team's reservations about direct contact, I remained convinced that speaking with Tricia was essential. I need to understand exactly what Joshua has told her about our marriage, I explained, and whether she's been an active participant in the deception or another victim of his manipulations. If you proceed with that meeting, you need precise objectives and boundaries, Karen cautioned. This isn't about emotional confrontation but strategic information gathering. I agreed, outlining specific questions and approaches that would yield valuable insights without creating additional complications. I'm approaching this as I would any forensic investigation, seeking facts, not emotional satisfaction. With our comprehensive strategy developed, we established a secure communication protocol and timeline for implementation. Each team member had specific responsibilities and reporting requirements. The architectural precision of our counter-strategy rivaled Joshua's deception in its thoroughness, a fact that provided unexpected satisfaction. As our meeting concluded, Athena pulled me aside with uncharacteristic hesitation. Selena, I need to raise a sensitive question that impacts our financial strategy. Go ahead, I encouraged, appreciating her directness. Have you considered the possibility that Joshua might have additional children beyond Emma and Noah? Perhaps even other families we haven't yet discovered? The question landed like a physical blow. Despite the mountain of deception already uncovered, I hadn't contemplated this possibility. The implications were staggering, both emotionally and strategically. No, I admitted. I haven't considered that. It would impact how we structure the financial investigation, Athena explained gently. If we're only looking for evidence of one additional household, we might miss patterns indicating more complex arrangements. Expand the parameters, I decided after a moment's consideration. If Joshua maintained one secret family for 15 years, we can't assume that's the extent of his deception. The drive back to Maxine's condo that evening gave me time to process the day's developments. The methodical planning had provided structure amid chaos, but Athena's question had reopened. The wound of betrayal. The possibility that Joshua's deception might extend beyond what I'd already discovered was both logically plausible and emotionally devastating. As I waited at a traffic light, my phone chimed with a text from Joshua. 6:45 p.m. Selena, I know you've hired Karen Blackwood. Please don't turn this into a legal battle before we've had a chance to talk. There are aspects to this situation you don't understand. The presumption that I needed his explanation to understand the situation ignited a cold anger. Joshua still believed he controlled the narrative, that his architectural precision in constructing deception granted him authority over its dismantling. I didn't respond to his message. Instead, I called David and authorized the expanded investigation, parameters Athena had suggested. Look for any evidence of additional relationships, children, or financial arrangements beyond the Vancouver family, I instructed. Leave no possibility unexplored. When I arrived at Maxine's condo, she was waiting with a glass of wine and an expression of concern. "How are you really holding up?" she asked after I'd summarized the day's strategy session. For the first time since discovering Joshua's betrayal, I allowed myself to acknowledge the personal impact beneath the professional response. "I'm functioning exactly as I need to right now," I replied carefully. "The rest will have to wait until I've secured my position." Maxine nodded, understanding the necessity of compartmentalization. "Just remember that eventually, the emotional processing will demand attention, and that's not a weakness." "First things first," I said, taking the wine she offered. "Tomorrow I meet Tricia Williams face to face. The architectural precision of Joshua's deception would be matched by the forensic thoroughness of my response. The scaffolding of our shared life had collapsed, but from those ruins I would construct something new, beginning with complete truth, whatever its cost. I waited until Monday morning to implement the next phase of my counterplan. After a week of investigation and strategy development with my team, I felt fully prepared to confront Joshua on my terms, with complete information and undeniable evidence. "I need access to my files," I told him by phone, my tone businesslike. "I'll be at the house at 10 o'clock to collect work documents. I expect you to be elsewhere during that time." His attempt at emotional manipulation was immediate. "Selena, please, we need to talk in person." "You haven't given me any chance to explain." "I've given you 15 years, I interrupted calmly. "I'll be there at 10. If you're present, my attorney will accompany me." Entering our home felt surreal, the familiar space now revealed as the stage set for Joshua's performance of commitment. I moved efficiently through rooms that no longer felt like mine, collecting essential items and examining the space with new awareness. In Joshua's home office, I noticed subtle changes. Drawers that had previously been locked were now emptied, folders missing from his filing cabinet, the safe in his closet standing open and cleared out. His attempts to remove evidence were as methodical as his deception had been. Fortunately, I'd anticipated this. Before confronting Joshua with my initial discovery, I had systematically photographed his office and documented visible financial statements. Maxine had created digital backups of our shared cloud storage, and Karen had secured legal authorization to access joint accounts and communications. As I was preparing to leave, I noticed a framed photograph that had been turned face down on Joshua's desk, one showing us at an industry award dinner 3 years earlier. The symbolic rejection stung despite my emotional armor. My phone chimed with a text from David. Confirmed connection between Joshua and Karen Mitchell. She previously worked at his firm in Portland before relocating to Boise 6 years ago. The timeline aligned with the start of the financial transfers. Another piece falling into place. I spent the afternoon at Karen's office, reviewing documentation she'd prepared for court filing. The evidence of Joshua's systematic deception over 15 years created a compelling legal narrative of profound breach of fiduciary duty within our marriage. "We're in a strong position," Karen assured me. "His deception isn't just emotional betrayal, it's financial fraud within a marriage, which courts take very seriously." "What about Tricia and the children?" I asked, the practical implications extending beyond my relationship with Joshua. "They'll likely pursue separate legal action for child support and potentially retroactive claims," Karen explained. However, your claim to marital assets takes precedence over relationships he conducted during the marriage. The clinical discussion of legal precedents and financial allocations provided a framework for processing what remained emotionally incomprehensible: the methodical compartmentalization of Joshua's life and loyalties. That evening, Joshua disregarded my boundaries and appeared at Maxine's condo unannounced. When she called me from the lobby, I decided to meet him in the building's conference room rather than sending him away, a calculated decision to assess his mental state and potential next moves. "How did you find me?" I asked as I entered the room, noting his disheveled appearance and the desperation evident in his expression. "I had my assistant call your office claiming to have documents to deliver," he admitted. "Your secretary mentioned you were working from Maxine's this week." The ease with which he extracted information through deception confirmed the patterns we'd documented. Even now, facing the consequences of his duplicity, his instinct was manipulation rather than honesty. "You've been to the house," he observed. "My office was reorganized. I collected my belongings," I replied neutrally. "Something I had every right to do." "Selena, please. You've completely shut me out without giving me any chance to explain the circumstances," he said, leaning forward with the earnest expression I'd once found so convincing. This situation evolved over many years in ways I never intended. 15 years of systematic deception doesn't evolve, Joshua. It requires sustained, deliberate choices. Thousands of them, made day after day. While looking me in the eye, "It started before we were married," he argued. "Tricia and I had history. When Emma came along, this isn't about Tricia and Emma anymore," I interrupted. "This is about your pattern of compartmentalized deception. Tell me about Karen Mitchell." "In Boise." The color drained from his face, his practiced explanation faltering. "How did you—" "I'm a forensic accountant specializing in financial deception, Joshua. Did you really think I wouldn't find everything once I started looking?" His shock at my knowledge of Karen Mitchell confirmed what David's investigation had suggested. Joshua had maintained multiple separate relationships, each carefully isolated from the others. The architectural precision of his deception extended beyond what even I had initially imagined. "Karen was a mistake," he said finally. "A brief relationship that became complicated." "Complicated by a child?" I asked directly, watching his expression. His silence was confirmation enough. The monthly payments, the timing of Karen's relocation, to Boise, the pattern of Joshua's client meetings in Idaho, all pointed to another secret family. "How many children do you have, Joshua?" I asked, my voice steady despite the surreal nature of the conversation. He looked away, unwilling or unable to meet my gaze. "4, he finally answered. "Emma and Noah with Tricia, Lily with Karen, and a son, James, from a relationship before we met. 4 children. 4 children whose existence he had systematically concealed throughout our 15-year marriage, while actively discouraging me from becoming a mother myself. The calculated cruelty of this deception transcended even the betrayal of his infidelity. "I never meant to hurt you," he offered weakly. "Each situation developed from unique circumstances, and I was trying to do right by everyone." "By lying to everyone," I corrected. "These weren't impossible situations forced upon you, Joshua. You actively created and maintained these separate lives. You made thousands of deliberate choices to deceive me and apparently several other women." "What are you going to do?" he asked, his architect's mind already calculating outcomes and contingencies. "I'm going to proceed with divorce on grounds of fraud and breach of fiduciary duty," I replied with the calm certainty that had returned once I had developed my strategy. "I'm going to document every aspect of your deception for the court. I'm going to ensure that your systematic financial fraud within our marriage is fully exposed." "You'll destroy everything," he said, a note of anger finally breaking through his controlled facade. "My professional reputation, my relationships with my children. You destroyed those things, Joshua. I'm simply bringing truth to light. As I stood to leave, he made one last attempt. We could still work this out, Selena. 15 years of marriage shouldn't end like this. I looked at the man I'd believed I knew completely, now revealed as someone who had maintained elaborate fictions across multiple relationships for decades. Our marriage ended the moment you decided I didn't deserve honesty. What remains now is ensuring I receive justice. The architect of deception was finally facing the structural failure of his design, watching as each carefully constructed compartment collapsed into the next. As I walked away, I felt something shift within me. Not just anger or hurt, but a strengthening resolve to rebuild my life on a foundation of truth, regardless of how painful that process might be. 2 weeks after discovering Joshua's deception, I sat in a conference room at Karen's law office surrounded by meticulously organized evidence. Across the table, Joshua and his attorney, Michael Donovan, reviewed the settlement proposal we had prepared. The documentation was comprehensive. Financial records showing systematic diversion of funds, evidence of identity deception, timelines of his calculated absences, and sworn statements from individuals who had unknowingly facilitated his duplicity. This is excessive, Michael protested, pushing the folder away. My client acknowledges marital indiscretions, but characterizing his actions as systematic fraud is inflammatory and unsupported. Karen's response was measured but firm. The evidence demonstrates 15 years of deliberate financial deception, calculated misrepresentation, and breach of fiduciary duty. We have documented $362,000 in diverted marital assets, systematic manipulation of joint investments, and fraudulent representation on multiple legal documents. Joshua's expression remained carefully composed, the architect attempting to maintain structural integrity even as the foundations crumbled. I observed him with detached clarity, seeing through the familiar facade to the stranger beneath. Selena, he said, ignoring the attorney's warning glances. This aggressive approach benefits no one but the lawyers. We could resolve this privately, with dignity. Dignity? I echoed, breaking my silence. You've maintained at least 3 separate families while actively preventing me from having children. You've systematically diverted our resources to support these families while lying to me daily for 15 years. Your concern for dignity comes remarkably late. I made mistakes, he conceded, leaning forward with the earnest expression that had once seemed so genuine. But everything I built with you was real. Our life together wasn't a lie. Our life together was architectural fiction, I replied evenly. An elaborate facade concealing a completely different structural reality. You designed it that way. Joshua! Michael attempted to redirect the conversation to financial terms, but I continued. 15 years of unspoken truth finally finding voice. What I find most revealing isn't the deception itself, though that was masterfully executed. It's the deliberate effort to prevent me from having children while simultaneously parenting 4 of your own. That reveals intent beyond mere compartmentalization. It shows calculated denial of something you clearly valued highly. Joshua's composed expression finally faltered. I never meant to hurt you. You never meant for me to discover the truth, I corrected. There's a significant difference. Karen directed our attention back to the settlement document. My client is offering terms that are remarkably reasonable given the circumstances. Equal division of legitimate marital assets acquired during the marriage, with separate consideration, for the documented funds diverted to support your other families. These terms are punitive, Michael argued. These terms reflect accountability, Karen countered. Alternative approaches would involve criminal charges for identity theft, fraud, and financial misrepresentation. Ms. Harrison has chosen the most discreet path available despite overwhelming evidence of actionable offenses. As the attorneys continued negotiating specific terms, I maintained eye contact with Joshua. The man who had shared my bed, my home, My life plans for 15 years while systematically constructing parallel lives with other women and children. There's something I still don't understand, I said during a break in the legal discussions. Why maintain our marriage at all? Why not simply leave once you had established your life with Tricia or Karen? Joshua considered the question with unexpected thoughtfulness. You represented something different, a partnership of equals, intellectual compatibility without the complications of children. Each relationship fulfilled different needs. So I was one component in your compartmentalized life design, I observed, assigned a specific function while kept carefully separated from the others. That's not how I saw it, he protested. But it is how you built it, I replied with the clarity that had emerged through weeks of investigation. The architect creating separate structures that served distinct purposes, never intended to interconnect. By the end of the 4-hour negotiation, Joshua had accepted most of our terms, his resistance crumbling against the weight of documented evidence. The man who had maintained control through elaborate deception now found himself without leverage, his carefully constructed separate worlds collapsing into one messy, indefensible reality. As we concluded the meeting, Joshua made one final attempt to establish emotional connection. 15 years should count for something, Selena. Despite everything, we built something meaningful together. I gathered my documents, meeting his gaze with calm finality. We built a structure that appeared sound, but lacked integrity at every connection point. No competent architect would consider that meaningful construction, Joshua. Walking away from that conference room, I felt neither triumph nor closure, just the quiet certainty that I had finally seen the truth clearly and responded with the same methodical thoroughness that had defined my professional life. The architect of deception had been confronted with the structural failure of his design, and I had reclaimed control of my story. 3 months after discovering Joshua's deception, I stood in the empty living room of our Portland home, now sold to a young family expecting their first child. The irony wasn't lost on me as I watched the pregnant woman excitedly plan nursery colors during the final walkthrough. The divorce had been finalized with surprising efficiency, largely due to the overwhelming evidence Karen had assembled. Faced with documentation of systematic financial fraud and deception, Joshua had ultimately accepted the settlement terms with minimal resistance. His carefully constructed world had collapsed too completely to salvage through legal maneuvering. The financial resolution had been clarified with the precision I'd applied throughout my career. Marital assets divided equally, with additional compensation for the documented funds Joshua had diverted to his other families. Karen had masterfully argued that his breach of fiduciary duty within the marriage created entitlement beyond standard divorce settlements, a position the judge had found compelling given the extensive evidence. More surprisingly, Joshua's professional life had unraveled alongside our marriage. The publicity surrounding his double life had prompted an internal review at his architectural firm, revealing questionable allocation of company resources and client billing practices. The man who had designed elaborate compartmentalized structures in his personal life had applied similar principles to his professional accounting, with equally unsustainable results. I had chosen not to pursue criminal charges, despite Karen's assessment that substantial evidence supported potential prosecution for identity theft and fraud. That decision wasn't made from lingering loyalty or affection, but from a clear-eyed assessment of what would best serve my recovery and future. Prolonged legal proceedings would keep me tethered to Joshua's deception rather than free to rebuild. My own professional reputation had remained intact, even enhanced in some respects. The forensic accountant who had methodically documented and dismantled her husband's financial fraud demonstrated skills that impressed even veteran divorce attorneys and judges. Several had approached Karen about retaining my services for complex cases involving hidden assets. As I placed my house keys on the kitchen counter for the new owners, my phone buzzed with a text from Maxine. Apartment is Ready whenever you are. Champagne chilling to celebrate fresh starts. The condo I'd purchased in downtown Portland represented more than just new housing. It symbolized my reclaimed independence. Located near the riverfront with views of Mount Hood on clear days, the Takei space had never been touched by Joshua's presence. No memories lurked in its corners. No echo of betrayal in its rooms. Before leaving the house for the final time, I checked each room, not from nostalgia, but from the methodical thoroughness that defined me. In the master bedroom closet, I noticed something I'd missed during packing. A small jewelry box on the top shelf, pushed toward the back. Inside was a pair of sapphire earrings Joshua had given me for our 10th anniversary, accompanied by a card, praising our unbreakable trust and transparency. The bitter irony of those words, written during the same period he was actively maintaining relationships with at least 2 other women and 4 children, struck me with unexpected force. Place the box in my purse, not from sentimental attachment, but as a tangible reminder of the deception I had survived. Some lessons deserved physical mementos. As I drove away from the house that had contained 15 years of what I now understood as elaborately staged marital theater, I felt neither triumph nor despair, just a clear-eyed recognition of reality and a determined focus on the future. Maxine's condo building appeared ahead, its modern glass architecture reflecting the afternoon sunlight. She waited in the lobby, champagne bottle in hand as promised, her expression a mixture of concern and celebration. "To new beginnings," she said as we entered the elevator to my new home. "And to clear vision," I added. The apartment was everything I'd hoped for, open concept with clean lines and abundant natural light. No architectural deceptions, no hidden structural compromises, just honest design with integrity at every connection point. "Any regrets?" Maxine asked as we stood on the balcony overlooking the city. I considered the question carefully. I regret believing a fiction for 15 years. I regret the family I might have had if I'd recognized the deception sooner. But I don't regret my response once I discovered the truth. The path forward wasn't entirely clear yet. I had received an offer to join a specialized forensic accounting firm in Seattle, focusing exclusively on complex divorce cases involving hidden assets. Karen had suggested I consider consulting for family court judges evaluating financial deception claims. David had even proposed collaboration on a book about identifying patterns of systematic financial fraud in marriages. All possibilities remained open, each offering different ways to transform my personal tragedy into professional purpose. The architect of deception had inadvertently designed the circumstances for my reinvention. As the sun set over Portland, casting long shadows across my new beginning, I raised my champagne glass in a private toast, not to survival, but to revelation. Sometimes the most painful discoveries create the clearest vision, and the collapse of carefully constructed illusions makes room for structures built on genuine foundations. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.